Okay, in Matthew 5:19, Jesus said, do and teach God's law. This is God's law number 32, death penalty for incorrigible sons. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jim McCotter. Here's God's law number 32 from God's Law, book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse 18 through 21. Suppose a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or mother even though they discipline him. In such a case, the father and mother must take the son to the elders as they hold court at the town gate. The parents must say to the elders, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious and refuses to obey. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Then all the men of his town must stone him to death. In this way, they will purge this evil from among you, and all Israel will hear about it and be afraid. End quote. When I first came across this law, I initially thought, how can this law be good? It seemed extreme. But like anything in the Bible, I think it's wise to not be too quick to throw something out just because it doesn't seem right to me or our current Christian culture. The popular Christian mindset is often wrong, if not usually wrong. During the days of Moses, all 5 million of God's people were wrong except Joshua and Caleb. Only Joshua and Caleb lived to enter the promised land with the next generation. In New Testament times, all Christians in the nation of Asia were wrong and cowards. All had rejected the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy 1:15. All the Christians in Corinth were all carnal and worldly. 1 Corinthians 3:1 and 3. All the churches of Galatia were all wrong. Galatians 1:1 and 3:1. All the Christians in Rome were all wrong and cowards. 2 Timothy 4:16. So I'm not too concerned about what is popular Christian opinion today. And if Paul did not shrink back from declaring the whole counsel of God, as he said in Acts 20:27, I don't think I'll plan to do any shrinking back either. Now look at God's law in Deuteronomy 21:18 through 21. It was obviously not for little children for a couple reasons. Number one, little children, parents can control. This was a young, bad man that parents could never control and was out of control in the town. Number two, this bad man was a glutton and a drunkard, and obviously, therefore, no child. At first glance, a person might think this law would be potentially dangerous for some son, but actually quite the opposite is true. This law provides 4 layers of protection for a son to be unrighteously lose his life. Number one, the father had to declare this man is dangerously out of control. Number two, the mother had to declare this man is dangerously out of control. Number three, the court had to declare this man is dangerously out of control. And number four, all the men in his town would agree this man is dangerously out of control for them to be willing to execute him. Why was this law so good and revolutionary, especially when God gave it? At that time in ancient history, there was no other law in the world protecting sons like God's law. In many cultures and countries, the father had life and death authority over their children and could kill their sons at any time for any reason. Even later, the Roman Empire gave fathers sole legal power of life or death over their children. In time, Christian influence with God's law affected the Western world, so a father could no longer arbitrarily kill a son. God's law elevated the woman and motherhood. God's law elevates women. But all Marxist communist countries today, as well as all Hindu and Muslim countries today, have unjust laws and customs when it comes to the family, in too many ways to elaborate here. We have looked at them in previous articles. But to understand God's law, a person must pray as David did in Psalms 119, verse 7, 12, and verse 18, where he said, I shall give thanks to you with uprightness of heart when I learn your righteous judgments. Blessed are you, O Lord. Teach me your statutes. Open my eyes that I may behold wonderful things from your law. End quote. America became a great nation blessed by God because of its godly foundation. That foundation was laid down by colonial America and godly civil leaders and their embrace of all God's law to be their civil law. New Hampshire law in 1680, the general laws and liberties of the province of New Hampshire, and I quote, were made by the General Assembly in Portsmouth on the 16th of March, 1679 and 1680, and approved by the President and Council. Cursing parents. If any child or children above 16 years old, of competent understanding, shall curse or smite their natural father or mother, or he or they shall be put to death, unless it can be sufficiently testified that the parents have been very unchristianly negligent of ye education of such children, or so provoked them by extreme cruel correction, yea, they have been forced thereunto to preserve themselves from death or maiming. A rebellious son. If any man have a rebellious or stubborn son of sufficient years and understanding, viz. 16 years of age or upwards, which shall not obey ye voice of his father or ye voice of his mother, yea, when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and mother, being his natural parents, bring him before the magistrates assembled in court, and testify unto them that their son is rebellious and stubborn, and will not obey their voice and chastisement, but lies in sundry notorious crimes. Such son shall be put to death or otherwise severely punished. End quote. Massachusetts Bay Colony Law in 1646. The Massachusetts Bay Colony enacted a law in November 1646 known as the Stubborn Children Law, which included provisions for the capital punishment of rebellious sons. This law stated that if a son, 16 years or older, was deemed stubborn and rebellious and failed to obey his parents even after they had disciplined him, his parents could bring him before the magistrates. If the magistrate determined the son was indeed stubborn and rebellious and was engaging in, quote, sundry notorious crimes, quote, he could be put to death. The Massachusetts Bay Colony based this law entirely on the book of Deuteronomy. While this law was on the books, I don't know if it ever needed to be enforced, but to declare God's law in and of itself will transform any society, as it did early America. Because of God's law, there were virtually no sons that did not obey and honor their parents in early America. The few who did were of a criminal sort. This law, in God's wisdom, virtually preempts the criminal element in society. Far more innocent people are murdered in society not having such a law in place than how many incorrigible sons, if any, would be put to death with this law. Most of you have never heard of Aleos Sarkumager, but he had a son that hated him and he could never control him. At that time, everyone, like most today, would have thought it to be a gross travesty of injustice to put an uncontrollable, incorrigible son to death. But you see, Aleos Sarkumager changed his name on January 7, 1877 to Hitler, whose uncontrollable son was Adolf Hitler. Had God's law been in place in that country at that time, one uncontrollable son would have been put to death and millions of other lives, of innocent lives, would have been saved. Time does not permit to tell about Mao Zedong, who hated his father and later murdered millions, or Vladimir Lenin, who hated his father and later murdered millions of innocents. Every mass murderer that I have studied hated his father and was an incorrigible, quote, stubborn and rebellious son, end quote, and should have been put to death by God's law. If God's law were in place today, endless innocent lives would be saved every day. All the humanistic ways people are trying to lower crime today is like what 19th century abolitionist Henry David Thoreau said, quote, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root, end quote. The only way to strike the root is to declare Jesus and God's law be re-established.